and develop researchers coming through. And Rosie is an example of somebody who's come through the network and been supported by us and now is doing amazing things, as you'll all be aware. Can we have the next slide, please? So these are the mainland territorial health boards of NHS Scotland. So essentially, as I said, it's across the board that we have people. Historically, the network has been based in Tayside, which is still the central network office, and actually that's one of the more active health boards in terms of clinical trial activity. The reason things have changed and waxed and waned over the years is the different types of research that goes on. So in the last few years, the things that have been that we've been very active in, and the things that have been very important and in the headlines a great deal, are the potentially disease-modifying treatments for dementia. And those are complicated to administer. They're infusion-based therapies. So you come to hospital for the day, you have a drip put in, you have an infusion, and that's not without side effects. But because of that, these studies really need to be done in the larger hospitals. And so we can run those in 4 sites across the country, going approximately from southwest to northeast in Glasgow, Edinburgh, Dundee and Aberdeen. But other types of research, which maybe are questionnaire based or involving oral treatments or involving scans and things like that, can be done at a number of different sites. So we can potentially do things in any of these mainland health boards. And as I said, even for some studies, recruiting people from the islands is possible, which is really exciting. If we could have the next slide, please. Because I think this is the time I hand over to Jackie, who can introduce herself and tell you a bit about the clinical studies officers.
Hello there. As Tom has said, I've taken over as the role of the network manager. I've worked with the network now for 8 years and been involved in research now for nearly 18 years now. So a lot of years in service, shall we say, and never a day goes by that I don't still enjoy doing what I do. So I'm really pleased to have taken over at the helm and hopefully take the network into the next phase of where we're going. The mainstay of our teams are clinical studies officers. So they range from band 6s, who are the clinical studies officers, and we also have a senior in each team who just manages the day-to-day running of each team across the main boards. So main roles that we actually involved in is raising public awareness about the network. So we play a pivotal role in actually making people aware of what we actually do. We do things like we attend conferences, we meet regular with local health teams just to let everyone know we're here, this is what we do, and this is what you can be involved in as well. And also we present at webinars just like this, just to raise awareness of who we are and what we do. We also encourage clinicians and care workers to consider neurodegenerative research and how it can fit into their everyday work. I would say an example of that most recently is we are very fortunate to collaborate with Alzheimer's Scotland to deliver training sessions to our colleagues in Alzheimer's Scotland to make them aware of what research is, what's involved in it, and how they can actually, as the experts in their role, can actually spread the word about research and how to be involved in it. So that has been really successful for the network. We've built really good collaborations with Alzheimer's Scotland, and hopefully that's going to continue. Emma Law and I have been all across all the Alzheimer's Scotland sites in Scotland, so for as far as Stranraer to Inverness, and very well attended and very well received. And the feedback we received from, encouraging clinicians and care workers to become involved is just shown in the conversations they're having with their clients. So that's been really successful. The CSOs also organise and carry out clinical research in hospitals, homes and care homes. So being a senior clinical study officer for the past 8 years, I have been involved in delivering research in Edinburgh, as someone in this audience will know me very well for the past 2 or 3 years. So we deliver research, we set up studies, we deliver the research, we get to know the participants really well, and we see the participant through the journey from the start of the study, from the screening right through to the very end and then beyond. I feel very privileged to be part of that and be part of their journey in research. So each CSO forms a part of this really strong network and engaging with people during their participation in studies. So we're really fortunate and we're really good at doing it, I have to say that. I don't need to say it, but I want to say it because it's true. Okay. Next slide, please, Helen. So the network CSOs come from a very range of different backgrounds and professions. As you can see, I'm not going to read through them all, but we come from, some people have got a speciality in dementia, some have a speciality in research nursing themselves, some are occupational therapists, and each person brings a certain level of expertise and knowledge, and through their development as they become an experienced CSO, everybody builds in their knowledge. And having that difference of backgrounds and professions in your team really opens up the professionalism that we have and the way we deliver our research, and everyone brings something to the team. As they say, there's no I in team. So everyone has a role to play regardless of their professional background, because everyone is so involved and enjoys what they do. So that makes a huge difference. And everyone has actually contributed to the success of the network, regardless of their background or profession. Okay, next slide. So I think that's Tom. I have to pass on to now.
Yep, I'm taking it. You can see that this is going to be a seamless, slick presentation where we hand responsibility from one to the other. It'd be much easier if we were just sitting around a table in a room, but that's not entirely feasible, and more people will be able to come doing it like this. But what's important for the network is that we maintain a balanced portfolio of research. So not only do we have trials in as many of our disease areas as possible, and across as much of Scotland as possible, but also a balance between commercial and academic clinical research studies. So the commercial studies are the ones run by drug companies to investigate their new drugs. So sometimes they're new drugs that are completely new, that have been coming through the earlier phases of research and are now being investigated for treatment in dementia or any of our conditions. Or sometimes and I'll talk about this distinction a bit more later. Some of the trials are looking at what's called repurposing drugs, so drugs that are already licensed for one indication, which there's some evidence have some effect in another condition, and so they put on a trial to investigate that drug in the new condition, and they have to go through that whole process in order to get it licensed for if indeed it proves to be effective, to get it licensed in the second condition. The academic studies are ones that are run by universities, and there is rightly a lot of concern about having too close links with commercial companies and pharmaceutical companies, and I share those concerns, and I'm very careful about my interactions with drug companies. So I think it's essential that we do work with these organizations, because we wouldn't have new treatments if it weren't for drug companies running trials, because they're the ones who can afford to do these trials. They cost an enormous amount of money to run one of these trials. But I think it's very important that the people doing the research, so us in the network, for instance, are independent of them. So we work with these organizations and run the trials investigating their medications, but do not have conflicts of interest that might make us more favorably inclined towards the medications than somebody who's entirely independent would be. So I take that issue very, very seriously. There's no end of invitations to sit on panels and committees and all sorts with pharmaceutical companies, and I say no to every single one of them, because I think it's really important, particularly being situated in the NHS, that we maintain that independence. But it's important for us to take part in these studies in order to give the people across Scotland the opportunity of taking part in this research. The academic studies are not entirely, but often state funded, so funded by the different research councils, and are not so often looking at entirely novel treatments, partly because of the costs involved. That tends to be done by the pharmaceutical company that manufactures them. But they can still be very high profile and very important. So for instance, MND SMART, which is a trial in motor neuron disease that you'll hear a bit more about later, is an academic study, but it's a very important one that's innovative and groundbreaking to a great degree, but is run and sponsored by a university rather than a commercial study, partly because it's looking at medications that are already off patent, and so as cheap as chips, as they say, but to examine if they have efficacy in motor neuron disease. And there are all sorts of things that our studies look at. Sometimes it's looking at the issues of surrounding diagnosis and trying to make sure that the diagnoses we make are as accurate as possible and that they're as timely as possible. There is still a lot of talk about early diagnosis. I think it's very important that we don't get carried away and go beyond the science and talk about making diagnoses earlier than is actually feasible. But I think making sure that diagnoses are timely and, most importantly, are correct is an important thing and is an area that is researched. There are studies that look into the underlying mechanisms of illnesses and treatments and their causes. And the bread and butter of the network are these clinical trials of therapies and treatments. And the phases of clinical trials are the different steps that a drug has to pass through before it can be considered for licensing and use in the NHS. So starting in the middle, so it's always Roman numerals, phases 2 to 4. So phase 1 is the very kind of basic initial science. Phase 2 is when it's really looking about safety in humans and also about dosing as to where is a reasonable dose to use. And is there some indication that it's got some efficacy? If that's successful, it'd move on to a phase 3 trial, which is the commonest type that we do, which is the what people think of when they talk about a randomized controlled trial. So the trial of a treatment which is probably unlicensed to that indication, but to see if it is effective. So does this wonder drug work in this condition? And they specify at the start what they mean by does it work. Phase 4 studies is a slightly looser term, but that's often after a drug has been licensed and starts to be used in clinical practice to look for safety on a wider scale. Because as became clear during the COVID pandemic and with some of the vaccines, if something has an adverse event that happens in 1 in a million people, if you've included 1,000 people in your study, you may never see that in that study. Whereas once it starts being used in a larger group of people in the general population, these rarer side effects sometimes come to light. And so it's important that monitoring continues after licensing to make sure that treatments that are used are safe. Better and more accurate ways of describing and formulating symptoms as well as treating them is an important thing, and importantly, better models of care. One of the things I'm really concerned about with the headlines about these new disease-modifying treatments for dementia, which may or may not be licensed in the UK, the evidence seems to suggest that they might be, though they're going through the correct procedures to find out whether that's going to happen or not. It's going to be a handful of people who are eligible for these. So I'm really keen that the people who either can't take them or end up not taking them don't get forgotten about. And so we still are supporting and caring for people, even if they don't get these new wonder drugs. Next slide, please. And as I alluded to at the start, we have a balanced portfolio of both commercial and academic studies in all these conditions. So in different types of dementia, not only Alzheimer's disease and dementia with Lewy bodies, but they're the commonest ones for which trials are run. Parkinson's disease and motor neuron disease are probably the next most common studies that we're involved in, and the remaining conditions are ones that are on our portfolio, and we do have some studies that are involved in Huntington's disease and multiple sclerosis in particular, but there's less activity than there are in the other disease types, and it's not so much about treatments, but rather it's often about registries and making sure that people are identified and the course of the disease is considered. Next slide, please. And we do our best to have as good links as we can across the whole of the NHS and beyond. So through Enrich, which is the organisation we're closely affiliated with, enabling research in care homes, we seek to have impact and links with folk in the care sector, but particularly for the network's clinical research studies, we link in with all of the medical specialties that you would consider to be relevant. So geriatric medicine or medicine of the elderly, neurology and old age psychiatry. But we also work very closely with radiology because scans are an important part of trials, scans of many different types. So working very closely with both the departments that do the scans and the radiologists who report them. Though often in pharmaceutical trials, the scan goes off into a computer somewhere and is reported by someone on the other side of the world. Pharmacy are vital because they're the ones who handle the medications in trials. Speech and language therapy is another specialty that professional group that we in some trials work very closely with. Next slide, please. And so now I'm going to tell you about some of the studies that we are either running or have been running recently. Not all of these are open to recruitment, but they give you a flavour of the sort of things that we're doing. So I'm going to talk about the dementia trials first, and then Jackie's going to talk about the other conditions after me. So if we could have the first trial, please. So the first one is the Alzheimer's Scotland Brain Tissue Bank, which isn't a drug trial, clearly, but a number of people very generously wish to donate their brain tissue to us after they die. And that's not only a very generous thing, but it's also scientifically a hugely valuable thing, because we collect a lot of information about the people who want to sign up to do this, and that can then be linked with the brain tissue samples that are collected after somebody dies. We can do this for anybody on the mainland in Scotland. The reason for that is after somebody dies, the post-mortem has to be done within a certain time period, as the brain does start to degrade over time, even with refrigeration, and the delays involved in transporting somebody from one of the islands, for instance, would just be prohibitive. But these sample, I don't unfortunately have at my fingertips the number of scientific articles that the samples from the Alzheimer's Scotland Brain Tissue Bank have been used in, but it's a large number of really internationally significant research that has used these brain samples, and it's a thing that contributes to the international science effort. And we're very grateful to Alzheimer's Scotland for the funding that they provide year on year for the Alzheimer's Scotland Brain Tissue Bank, which is a joint project between the Alzheimer's Scotland Dementia Research Centre at the University of Edinburgh and us at the network. That's probably enough about the Brain Tissue Bank. Go to the next slide, please. So EMBARK, run by Biogen, was a phase 3 trial of a medication called aducanumab that some of you may have heard about, which is now licensed in the United States. It is not licensed in the UK or the EU, and Biogen have indicated that I believe that they're not going to seek to get it licensed. There is quite a convoluted story of this trial and its pair, which stopped and started, and eventually aducanumab was licensed in the US, but that decision was considered quite controversial, and a number of the committee involved at the FDA in America resigned in protest. But nevertheless, it's a trial that we contributed to in a number of sites across Scotland. It was the first of these potentially interesting disease-modifying medications, which we're hearing so much about. You can see from the bottom line there is that it's a very long time that people are involved with this. So many of these studies take about 3 years from somebody joining us to the study ending, and sometimes, as was the case with EMBARK, people are invited to continue for longer. So everybody who took part in the EMBARK study was invited then to take the drug, knowing it's the drug, so no longer a blinded trial, for a period of time afterwards. And it's in fact only now, later this year, that this trial is going to be wrapping up completely. So like many of these studies, they're looking to recruit a very precise group of people. A cynic might say that they're looking for the group that's going to maximize the chance of them finding a positive result, but nevertheless they specify very precisely exactly who they want to take part in the trial, which is why we have to screen people, and we invite people along, and we take the view that we should only invite people if there's a reasonable chance that they will be eligible to take part. So Many of our participants give us permission to look at their medical records. So we do that beforehand to check there's nothing obvious that would mean that they wouldn't be eligible for the trial. So they're not taking a medication that would exclude them or something like that. And then they're invited in and they do a number of these rating scales, which all have horrific acronyms that you can see towards the bottom of the page. But this is what the clinical studies officers do. And with many of these, it's possible for somebody to score too high as well as too low, because it's this precisely specified group that the trial is looking for. But very often, particularly in dementia, one doesn't necessarily have to have a diagnosis. So people with mild cognitive impairment are also eligible for these trials. But so this is a in a sense a historical trial, but it's an important one that we contributed to in recent years. So this was run by the drug company Biogen, who produced this medication aducanumab. Could I have the next slide, please? This pair of trials is also run by a drug company. This is run by Novo Nordisk. This is one that, again, we're contributing to in a number of sites across Scotland. But rather than this being a new treatment, this is an example of a drug repurposing. So these trials, the only difference between Evoke and Evoke Plus is whether or not somebody, when you scan their brain, has a certain degree of vascular change in it. In essence, they're otherwise identical. So they're really the same trial, which for an administrative reason have had to be considered separately. But this is investigating a drug called semaglutide, which is a licensed treatment for diabetes, which is used in the NHS across the UK, which seems to have some evidence to suggest that it could also have an effect in Alzheimer's disease. So they're recruiting people with mild cognitive impairment and early Alzheimer's dementia. And other than that, it follows a similar route to the Biogen trial. It lasts for a long time. There are lots of rating scales, but the advantage to the studies running for a long time is that we really do get to know our participants, which is excellent. And they check in with us every now and again. We see them regularly. Blood tests are taken, which can be acted on if anything is identified. And often I've noticed that clinical services aren't in a position to follow people up for a period of time, 3 years, for instance. But we have this contact. So if somebody's finding a difficulty with something or something changes in them, because we're all based in the NHS, we can link them up with their clinical service again. We can speak to their GP and hopefully be helpful in that. But certainly a lot of our participants do feedback that this is a benefit to them of taking part in research. Can we have the next slide, please? And now this is where I hand it over to Jackie.
Yes. So in Lothian, we're the only site across the NHS sites that are actually doing this study, exenatide PG3. And it's a potential disease-modifying treatment for Parkinson's disease. And interestingly enough, again, it's a repurposed drug. Exenatide is used in type 2 diabetes in general practice. So we have been running the study for the past 2 years. Most participants are coming to the end of the trial, and it's been going really well. Like Tom says, we build up really good relationships, and people, the participants come in very regularly, and they receive care that we would normally receive in normal practice. So as Tom says, if anyone comes up with some kind of blood sample irregularity, we can actually look into that and inform GPs and act upon that. Now, obviously, you can see the whole list of assessments. So just, obviously, I'm not going to go through them all, but just let you understand, each CSO across the boards, we all have to be really closely monitored, and we get trained regularly, and to make sure that across the board, any assessments we perform and with the participants are standardised and they're done exactly the same way. Because then that obviously has a measurement for the outcome in the end. So we are all very much involved in lots of training programs to make sure we're the right person doing the right assessment for the right study. So over the years, I've lost count. I think I've been trained on maybe about 100 different assessments of various different ways. So sometimes you forget though, and sometimes it's good to be retrained over a number of years. So like I said, this study is running in Lothian and it's going really well, and it's running for 2 years. And the last patient is in 4th of January. Next slide, please. So this study is being run in Glasgow, only in Glasgow, and it's for multiple system atrophy, which is one of the rarer studies that we in the NDN have been involved in. And it's a randomised, double-blind, placebo-controlled study, and they're hoping that this medication is going to help with the early phase of the disease. They're due to randomise the first person in Glasgow by the end of this month, and that, like I said, we're the only site in Scotland that's doing this, and they're in Glasgow. So, really exciting stuff for the network to be involved in such a severe, a severe disease area. So we'll hear all about that and hear how that's going on later on. Like I said, they're going to randomise the first person later on this month. And I think I'm going to be involved in some of the assessments, which will be great. So I'll let you know in due course how that's going. Next slide, please. So Tom's already alluded to MND SMART, and unfortunately, just as recently as last couple of weeks, the way they've did this study, it was a systematic multi-arm study, which means there was loads of different arms going at one time. They were trying medications. If that didn't work, they would try something else. So unfortunately, the trazodone and memantamine arm is in a complete. They've had to stop because that didn't show the efficacy that they were looking for. So they're continuing on with the amantadine versus placebo arm. In this year in 2023 and 24 and 25. So lots of things in the pipeline for MND SMART. Doesn't mean the end of the study because that arm has stopped, but they are going to continue on with it. A really important study, and it received a lot of publicity via Doddy Weir and been involved in it. So it's a really important pivotal study for this type of study to do with in research. And it's managed by the University of Edinburgh, and we have sites in Grampian and Tayside. And as Tom said earlier, for rural areas, there is some participants from Orkney who are part of MND SMART, and they're very well looked after, and the staff go and see them sometimes, and they meet, and they come down to Aberdeen as well. So yeah, we're trying reach the rural areas, so thankfully we've got some participants for a very much needed area of research. Next slide. So this is a new Parkinson's study that's been done in Tayside, and it's looking at our oral medication, and it's for early Parkinson's disease with diagnosed within the last 2 to 5 years. They're looking for participants at age 30 to 80, and again, there's a whole host of assessments that have to be done to look at the outcome measures, and all the staff are trained in how to manage these and how to perform the assessments. Study duration, again, is quite long. It's 3 weeks. Starts off every 4 weeks, and then it tapers off every 6 weeks after that. Whenever they come along, they'll have bloods done, they'll have assessments done, vital signs done, and again, that will just be recorded and make sure there isn't any changes. Interestingly and successfully enough, Tayside have been the first UK site to open for both these arms of the study, and Tayside were the first site to actually randomise, and they're the top enroller for the study as well, which is really, really exciting stuff for Tayside. And that study is open to recruitment at the moment, which is good. And what I would like to say is, if at the end of the talk, if anybody's interested in hearing anything more about any of this research, please let us know, and we can let you know and put you in contact with the sites that are actually looking after the studies. Next slide. I think that's me again. So how do we approach volunteers or participants in our studies? Well, we've used historically we've used 4 routes. So we've got permission to contact, and we have joined dementia research. We also receive direct referrals from clinicians, and we also use a Ireland Care Register. Tom's going to go on and talk to you a wee bit about these different types of approaches that we've used, and all been quite successful. So he'll kind of allude a wee bit more to them. Okay, thanks.
So could I have the next slide, please, Helen? So Permission to Contact is the latest name for our research interest register, which is also 50 years old today, because it was one of the original activities of the network was to form a register of people with dementia or their relatives who'd like to take part in research across Scotland, and that is now expanded to include all of the conditions that we that we cover. But the latest incarnation of it is called permission to contact, which essentially is asking people to give us their permission to contact them about research opportunities they might be eligible for. It's partly had to evolve because of the general data protection regulation. So this is all compliant and allows us to keep people's names and addresses and telephone numbers securely. It's all held within the NHS network, but it means that we can have their details and contact them if and when a research opportunity occurs. For a long time, it's been this rather snazzy leaflet that you can see on the right-hand side of the screen, which gets sent to every patient with an appointment letter at my clinic, for instance. And it's very easy. It's just a kind of a brief thing to fill in, and it just says, yes, I'd like to hear more. Someone who sends it back isn't committing themselves to taking part in anything. All they're saying is that they're happy to be contacted. And importantly, I think crucially, and this is where it makes this system better than a lot of the others, including Joint Dementia Research, which I still have a lot of time for, is that we ask people's permission to look at their medical records. So this means that we can really be targeted in who we're inviting along to trials. We don't just invite anyone who's got a particular diagnosis saying, come along, we'll bring you along and waste a day screening you and say at the end of the day, oh, I'm sorry, you can't take part because you're on this medication or because you've got this health condition. So it means we can do our homework and only invite people who it seems are likely to be eligible, subject to all the various tests that we need to do. But the latest development is in the bottom right of the screen. You can see the little black and white QR code. We now have electronic sign up. It's possible for people to sign up through the NHS Research Scotland website, and if you are so inclined, you could zap that little QR code with your iPad or your smartphone, and it'll take you through to the web page where you can complete the same information that the paper forms do, but that people can sign up electronically now. Next slide, please. It all comes down to this aim of the network, which is to offer everybody the opportunity to take part in research. It's clearly not going to be for everybody, but if we don't offer people the opportunity to take part, they won't necessarily get the opportunity to take part. Some people do ask me about research, but not everybody does, and it tends to be the less deprived, the more educated people who ask about research. And why should it be just that group who get the opportunity to take part? So we really want to offer everybody the opportunity to take part, which is why, as I said, in my clinic, it just gets sent to everybody. And I'm sure many people ignore it. I'm sure some people use it as a bookmark. I'm sure some people rest their coffee mugs on it, but quite a few people do send it back because they're interested. And that means we know that they're interested and we can get in touch with them. So this is, I think it's been a fantastic success. And the numbers continue to grow month on month, and it's really exciting to see. We have the next slide, please. We also can have direct referrals. So if somebody is seen in clinic and the person seeing them remembers to ask about research, which doesn't always happen, and they say they're happy to have their details shared, then we can just be email directly their name and unique health identifier, their KI number. If they've given verbal consent, that can be passed on, and that happens from all sorts of clinics. But for the clinicians who aren't research active, it does rely on them actually remembering to do that. So I like our permission to contact system because it doesn't rely on anybody remembering anything. It just means that everybody is presented with this opportunity. It puts the decision into their hands. If they want to find out more, they can. If they don't, there's no pressure. But at the bottom here, that summarizes really where we're coming from the network, that everybody should be offered the opportunity to take part in research. Go to the next slide, please. And that's a little bit more about the Rowling Care Register and Joint Dementia Research. Joint Dementia Research is a UK-wide thing that came after our Scottish Dementia Research Interest Register. It's got a lot of advantages. So again, it's about empowering the person themselves to decide what they want to take part in, if anything. And in fact, our permission to contact is registered on Joint Dementia Research as a study. So everything is as connected as possible, because really there shouldn't be a wrong way to get into research. But the real advantage of joint dementia research is the gatekeeping role, in that if a student at a university is looking for 3 people with frontotemporal dementia for their clinical psychology doctorates, joint dementia research can help them find these people, which means that we don't have the resources. Alzheimer's Scotland doesn't have the resources. Very few people have the resources to link people up like that. Whereas joint dementia research is a database that can do that, and it's got great a great way of doing that. Next slide, please. So I think that's where we stop talking, and we've got just under a quarter of an hour to answer any questions if anybody has any. I hope that's been informative. I hope that's been more or less what you were looking for. But we've got time to chat. So if anybody would like to, you can either type something in the chat, or put your hand up, or just unmute yourself and ask, and Jackie and I will endeavour to answer your questions. Stephen. Oh, I think you're still muted. Sorry.
The famous "you're still muted." Well,
I do that all the time.
I know. So, just for those who don't know me, because I guess I'm new to this organisation, my name's Stephen Brannan, and I'm the chairman of the Edinburgh branch of Parkinson's UK. And so, obviously, from a Parkinson's point of view, I'm very interested in research. And one of the questions I was going to ask is what we have in the Parkinson's organisation through Edinburgh is we've set up research interest groups. So we have groups of people within our community of Parkinson's people who have already indicated an interest in research. And we have regular meetings with the University of Edinburgh. We have regular meetings with other guest speakers talking about research. So that, to me, is a good way of recruiting people who are interested in research from your own body of people.
Absolutely. No, and I hear great things about the research interest groups. I was chatting with Gordon Duncan, who's a clinician in Edinburgh, who's our he essentially runs our Parkinson's trials in Edinburgh, and we're speaking with Parkinson's UK about basically integrating things a bit more. So that's a development we really hope to effect in the near future, because we want to facilitate as many people as want to getting more experience in research. Thank you. Winnie, I think you were next.
Hi, my name's Winnie Henry, and I was very, very interested, Tom, in what you had to say. I'm sorry, but I've got an overlap with another group. I should have been on at 2 o'clock. So I just
dear.
Thank you, everybody, and I'll see you at the next one. Thank you.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
David, I think yours is the next hand.
Yes, thanks, Tom. I've been listening to everything you say, and on every slide it says everybody should be involved in research. I've been involved now with Rosie's groups and various other groups for the last couple of years, and I've always wanted to be more involved in research. And at one time we spoke about partnering with PhD students to see if we could help them from our lived experience perspective. But there seems to be a barrier because this hasn't happened. And I think we've got a lot to offer, but we're not getting the opportunity to do that. I know we may not be academically qualified to take part in that sort of academic research, but we've got a hell of a lot of experience and it's not being used.
I completely agree. So firstly, just to slightly correct your quoting of our slides. So I think it'd be great if everybody were involved in research, but it's not necessarily for everyone. So we want to offer everybody the opportunity, because for some people it's just going to be something they're not interested in or not interested in now. But in terms of involving the partners in research, in mentoring PhD students, I completely agree. I think it's an enormous opportunity. I must confess, so I'm putting in a number of grant applications at the moment that are going to be asking for exactly these things, and the partner's been very helpfully involved in these things. So I'm not sure whether one of these applications is what you're referring to, because it depends on us actually getting the funding for something like that, which might be why it's not started already. But another thing that the deadline is next week, so it's very uppermost in my mind, is another piece of work that we're looking into to trying to get funded, to look at all the challenges of involving people with lived experience, because there are all sorts of institutional reasons why it's difficult to get anybody involved in the university who's not a university employee. And I completely agree with you. It'd be fantastic, but we also need to identify the challenges about why it's not happening and seek to overcome them. So I'm on board, but I'm aware it's not easy.
Okay.
Has anybody else got anything they'd like to ask us? Oh, Lynn, I think, is your hand up?
It is. Thank you. Thank you so much. That was so informative. My job is quality improvement, and we work with dementia services across Scotland to help them improve their services. And you mentioned as part of the presentation, you know, the work going on with through Alzheimer's Scotland. I was just wondering, in terms of, particularly, we work a lot with practitioners delivering post-diagnostic support for people living with dementia. And I wondered, is there a preferred route, you know, that you would advise? You know, is there a leaflet for joint dementia research, for example, or do you think it's a permission to contact leaflets? You know, it's just so that we can promote that post-diagnostic support leads group.
That'd be great. Could you get in touch with us with your details, and we can send you loads of leaflets. But what I'd say is that, so to my mind, I think the best route in is permission to contact. Because we've got the nice leaflet. There is the online sign up you can do now as well, but we're trying to be as linked up as possible. So everybody who signs up through us will then be asked if they'd like to join dementia research as well. So they'll be offered as many opportunities as they would like. So that's the most complete and straightforward way for somebody to get in, and we can send you as many leaflets as you need to paper your downstairs loo. And just, I mean, they are self-explanatory, but we can also, if it'd be helpful, we could talk about whether it'd be feasible to develop something like the training we did with the Alzheimer's Scotland link workers and dementia advisors to train people. So we did it so that Jackie was being very self-deprecating about it. They've worked very hard training kind of, I think 150 of the staff with a day's training to really help them have confident conversations about research, and the feedback's been fantastic. So if we could roll that out wider, for example, to the folk you're involved with, that'd be great. Yeah, no, that's really good, and I would be personally distributing the leaflets, but I wonder maybe if there's an opportunity at one of our post-diagnostic support leads meetings. We have a network of practitioners, and there's about 90 leads involved in that network, and probably about 40 attend our quarterly meetings. You know, it's a very robust network, and I think that would be a great way in for you, whether if you're happy to come along and speak, or whether we could pass information on. I think that would be really valuable. But I see Helen's going to email me, so we can keep this dialogue going after today. But thank you so much. That was so informative, and very, you know, just great to hear that the research that's taking place in Scotland. Great, thanks, Lynn.
Thank you.
Tom,
Stephen,
can I give you another
yes, please.
Observation? Speaking from personal experience, one of the reasons I volunteered to get part of a clinical trial and interested in research is to get more assessments done, or to get more care during the life of the disease or whatever. Because certainly from a Parkinson's point of view, you see your Parkinson's nurse once a year. 6 months later, you see your Parkinson's consultant, if you're lucky. And you know, the quality of these meetings is pretty dismal, if I tell the truth. I had a meeting with my Parkinson's nurse last week, and she said, "Oh, I see you've just newly been diagnosed." I said, "No, I've been diagnosed for 11 years now." So the quality of information these guys are getting fed is obviously pretty poor. One incentive that I see for people taking part in research is to get involved in more regular monitoring. However, as Jackie will know, I keep asking, what's the result of the monitoring? And so, for example, all these tests and assessments that you get, it would be useful to get some feedback during the clinical trial of just observations from the clinical staff, that when you started the trial, you could do this particular test in 3 seconds. Now you're well through the trial, you've got it down to 1 second, or any form of assessment at all, just to show how the disease is progressing.
Yeah, that's great to hear. I mean, I think I agree that a number of people do like the kind of the extra attention and the extra assessment that they get. depending on how tightly controlled the trials are, sometimes we are able to discuss kind of the results and these sorts of things and how they change over time, and sometimes we're not, just because there are often ridiculously complex regulations about who can know what and these sorts of things. But certainly from my point of view, when we're permitted to, I'm always happy to have those conversations.
But is it not the case, maybe I've got it wrong, is it not the case that it's my data?
So yes. So, but again, it depends on exactly what data and what's stored where. So this is going to get a little bit abstruse, but some of the information goes into your medical records, and those are your data, absolutely. And you can request to see all of those through the usual routes. Some things are go off to, well, depending on which trial it is, go off to different organizations who do the analyzing and things, not always in the EU. So different regulations apply. So in theory, it may well be that you could apply to access this stuff. It just varies from trial to trial.
Okay.
I'm not against sharing information at all. I quite agree. It's about you. But sometimes these things are just very tightly controlled.
Yeah, and like you said, Tom, it depends on what role or purpose you have in the study as an assessor. So I'm not the blinded rater, so I couldn't, if someone was to ask me what was my assessment scores for X, Y, and Z, I couldn't give that information because I'm completely blinded to that information, because that, if I knew that sort of information, that could influence my part of the study and what I do. So you've just got to be very careful about what information we can give. But it's certainly, something, we can look at.
So in the
The
last
new boy always asks the most questions. So taking the role as the new boy, I'll ask more questions.
Perfect.
That's okay. That's great. No.
Great.
What specific actions would you be looking for us as participants in this group to take to try and encourage more people? Is this group about giving us information or about trying to get us to take action to do things?
So I think Rosie is maybe best placed to answer that, because one of the things I admire most about the Partners in Research is how autonomous and self-determining you are as a group, and there are a number of aims of the kind of the newest incarnation of the Partners in Research. So the purpose of this webinar was really just to tell you what's happening with the network. We'd be very grateful for you publicizing and spreading the word and these kind of things, but the core work of the Partners in Research is multifaceted and links to this, but is kind of broader than that as well. So Rosie, I don't know if you want to have the last word and just kind of speak to that.
I think Rosie's had to go to another meeting.
Oh, if Rosie's absent, she can't speak to it. But so the specifics of so there's a lot of good stuff. I mean, the book that they published is a good example of that. But it's partly also about seeking ways in which people with lived experience can be involved in meaningful ways in research. And part of it is about highlighting where that doesn't work, like David did with his question, and trying to move towards it becoming just mainstream that people are involved in a meaningful way. And that's, as I say, what a lot of the grant applications I'm slaving over at the moment are about, to try and make that more of a reality. I think in the interest of time, we should probably stop there. But thank you very much, everyone, for coming. It's been a great pleasure speaking to you all. Thank you for the attention and the questions and the discussion. And thanks again for all that you do with the Partners in Research.
Just a quick one, David. During our next meeting, can you turn on your lava lamp? It looks wonderful.
I don't know if it still works. I actually took it out of the garage. It'd been lying for years and thought I would put it back up. But I have to switch it on about half an hour before the call because it takes a long time to warm up.
Okay. Thank you, everyone, for joining.
Thank you.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Okay.
Bye-bye, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.